and they'd gone on a day hike out in the mountains outside of Lincoln. And as they're coming walking across, and they're coming back to their car, there's a kind of a big clearing on a high ridge, timber. They came out of the timber, a couple hundred yards back to the car, and as they're approaching their vehicle late in the afternoon, early evening, some people in the trailhead start running at them, pointing. And in this scenario, there'd been Bigfoot sightings and activity. And they turned around, and right on the edge of the timber, they see this large, dark figure turn and walk back in the timber on the trail, or in the vicinity of the trail, like it followed them out to the edge of the timber. And Jeff and his family had turned, and they just saw this large black figure turning and walking back in the timber.
In this episode of Bigfoot Society, I talked to Mr. Rick Rasmor from the great state of Oregon. I've been talking to Rick for about a year now, trying to get him on the podcast so he can share his collection of anecdotal evidence, and I'm happy to say that we finally were able to make it to work. I'm not going to spoil the surprises here, but there are some really cool things that we go over in a way I just can't explain it, but Back to the Future / Forrest Gump vibes. I'll leave it at that. It gets pretty cool. I think if you're a Bigfoot nerd, if you're a Bigfoot Society hardcore listener, you're going to really like this episode. And one last thing before we start, there's something free that I need your help with. If you can go ahead and subscribe to whatever platform you're listening to this on right now, and please share it with your friends. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you're subscribed to Bigfoot Society over on YouTube. We are going to the moon, so you may as well get your moon shoes on now. Yeah, that's going to be a thing. It's going to get pretty crazy, guys. Again, thanks for listening, and let's start the show.
All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to a gentleman tonight. His name is Rick. He had approached me through Facebook, I believe, and he's got some interesting stories, anecdotal evidence from over the years. Rick, how's it going? I'll let you take it from here.
Doing pretty good, man. Thanks a lot for having me on. So I'm glad we can actually finally get together, because you and I have kind of bounced back and forth on this for a number of months. So
it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. So one thing or another. So anyway, yeah, it's and not to be overly vague, but I live in Oregon. I've lived in Oregon my whole life, pushing 60 years almost. And I just had an interest in this topic on Roger Patterson and Mr. Bob Gimlin put a movie out. And it's just been always intrigued with it ever since. So, and over the course of that time, as Jeremiah, you and I have spoke, I don't have any hair-raising encounters or stories for people. But over the course of time, I've met people, I've talked to people, I've got a lot of good friends, and over all these years, I just have a lot of stories that make me more of a believer. I haven't seen one. I know there's knowers and believers out there. There's naysayers. There's people that are just don't know, and I don't know. But I hear enough, and have been interested enough in the topic for well over half a century that I said I've got some stories that are kind of cool to me, and I've kept track of them over the years, and I guess it's probably a good time to share some of those.
I love it. It sounds like you're being in Oregon in general doesn't matter where you're at. You're in a cool area, but it sounds like you're in a cool area. So I'm excited to hear. You've brushed paths with people that might be known to the Bigfoot community, but I'm excited to hear what you've gathered along the years. So,
well, and first and foremost, I'm not a researcher. I spend a lot of time in the woods. I hunt and fish, and my family and I have a lot of trail cameras that stick out in the mountains and all that. And again, I've got no groundbreaking, earth-shattering evidence that's going to be presented tonight, but I've got like I said, a lot of cool, interesting stories of a lot of people that there's a lot of people out there who were never a believer until they became a believer or a knower. And there's those that have chased their entire lives and never really satisfied their need to know. But yeah, we live right at the base of Mount Hood. I've lived in Western Oregon my entire life. You got Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. I spent a lot of times up in the northeastern Oregon, where Paul Freeman. Most people know about Paul Freeman as well. I'm very familiar with that country. And I've just got little bits and pieces from all these areas that just kind of another pieces of the puzzle, I guess, so to speak. So what I put together is I've got a number of stories. Again, the vast majority of anecdotal, but that's all. The vast majority of those are second person. These are acquaintances and or friends of mine that we've just we've talked, we've had stories. So if you don't mind, I'll start off. I've kind of segregated this region by region, and then I said I'll just kind of start that way. I'll start with some kind of miscellaneous, and I'll kind of focus on a couple different regions. That Northeast Oregon area, obviously the Pacific, or the Mount Hood, Cascade Range, and up into Mount Hesse Hounds in Washington as well. So, I'll start with kind of going chronologically as well. A couple miscellaneous ones. A good friend of my little brother, younger stepbrother, and again we're going back. This is probably back in the '80s, but and he told me the story years ago as well. But they were up in Montana, Lincoln, Montana. If anyone knows, kind of west central Montana, and there was a lot of reports and stories and sightings of Bigfoot back there in Lincoln, Montana, back in the mid '80s. So when I heard this story from my brother's friend Jeff, it was probably in the late '80s, early '90s. And Bigfoot to me back then, you didn't hear about Montana. You heard about Oregon, Washington, California, Canada. You didn't hear much about the Midwest, Texas, Oklahoma, wherever. But my brother's friend Jeff, I remember him telling us one day after they'd gone back to Montana, I think to see some family friends during the summer vacation, whatever, outside of school. And we started talking, and he knew we kind of had interest in Bigfoot. And they'd gone on a day hike out in the mountains outside of Lincoln. And as they come walking across, again, some of these things I'll kind of paint the vision I have from the interpretation I have of the stories that I heard these people over the years. Is what's probably in the details they gave me, and then the way I picture it. And they're coming back to their car. There's a kind of a big clearing on a high ridge, timber. They came out of the timber, a couple hundred yards back to the car, and as they're approaching their vehicle late in the afternoon, early evening, some people in the trailhead start running at them, pointing. And in this scenario, there'd been Bigfoot sightings and activity. And they turned around, and right on the edge of the timber, they see this large, dark figure turn and walk back in the timber on the trail, or in the vicinity of the trail, like it followed them out to the edge of the timber. And Jeff and his family had turned, and they just saw this large black figure turning and walking back in the timber. So, and really, that's just kind of, that's how a lot of my story is going to be. It's going to be stuff like that. But again, there's several of them. So,
well, this is great, Rick, because I have listeners from all over, and people are going to be like, oh my goodness, Lincoln, Montana.
Yeah.
Totally. I've seen one in Lincoln, Montana,
Yeah. Well, and great. And ultimately that might be, how this all comes together, because I'll get into something, actually just a couple more down the line here. Yellowstone National Park, on the east side of Yellowstone, Cody, Wyoming. There's a number of reported sightings and stories come out of there. Idaho, same thing. I've the Bauman incident, which goes way back, and Teddy Roosevelt talked about that. But again, it's when I was growing up and younger, it was Oregon, Washington, California, and then you get up into Canada as well. So, and as we see now, that's I don't know if you want to refer to it as a phenomenon or not, but it's not just Oregon, Washington, California, and Canada. So, again, just since these are not so much specifically regional, I've just got a couple miscellaneous stories. So that's the one, Lincoln, Montana, and back in the early to mid '80s, probably. A good friend of mine, I'll have a couple references to him. Avid outdoorsman. He's a non-believer, and we'll get to one of his stories a little bit later, more local. But a good friend of his that I've got to meet over the years. Again, a very simple story, but he was down, and I'm kind of reading off some notes as we go here, but down along the Oregon coast, Siletz River. Oregon coast has a good history too. You don't hear a lot about it. They're driving the road down the Siletz River, and this is probably back in the early '70s now, and just a tall black figure crosses the road in front of them. As a lot of sightings are, you're driving at night, and all of a sudden, bam, 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 2 or 3 steps, and that's the experience you have that the vast majority of the people in this country will never have, or in this world for that matter. So, a crossing of the highway heading down the Siletz, middle of the night, or not middle of the night, but probably mid-evening. And so like I said, it's that's all I have on the story. But again, it's just an acquaintance of a friend that saw something that, can you explain it? Can you not? Whatever. And then finally, of my miscellaneous stories, this has to do with Yellowstone as well. Probably about 10 years ago, we used to go, my family and I used to go to Yellowstone, my wife and our kids, and even prior to kids, we used to go to Yellowstone quite a bit, once or twice a year. And again, having heard some of these stories, especially on the eastern boundary of Yellowstone, there's actually some photos from around Old Faithful, if anyone's seen those from a couple years ago in the snow. Possibly some Bigfoots walking amongst some bison or buffalo on the trail system out on Old Faithful in midwinter. But this is on the east and northeast end of Yellowstone. I just saw some very large impressions in the snow as we're driving through, in 2 or 3 feet of snow in an area that typically deer and elk are not going to be that time of year. And we slowed down and I took a look at them. I didn't hop out. But it was just interesting because that section of eastern Yellowstone getting into western Wyoming on the backside of it has, over the last number of years, I've seen, heard, and read several stories of sightings, encounters, whatever. So I just saw big impressions. Big impressions in what to me would be thigh deep snow crossing the road.
So you personally did yourself. Wow. Okay. How far apart were those?
It's significant enough. So you see these photos from time to time in the snow, Alberta, Canada, BC, or wherever, and deer in deeper snow will hop and post hole bounce. And I didn't get out and look in those holes,
sure,
to see exactly what it was. You're in the Rocky Mountains. You're in an area that's getting pretty dang cold, and the vast majority of wildlife migrate out of those higher elevations. And this is probably February-ish or so, probably near this peak snowpack. And it was just to see the impressions. They're just big, oval type of impressions in snow at a relatively at 3 to 4 footish type of distance. But that being said, also, I mean, if something is stepping that, you would expect maybe some toe dragging some snow. And we didn't. We just slowed down. We went past that area once, and turned around, came back, and I just to specifically look at those impressions in the snow. It could have been a deer. There should not have been deer up there. Not to say there wasn't. Most likely not elk. They don't typically hop like that, especially in snow environments. So they'll plow their way through. There's bison up there. There's moose, but same thing. They're big, strong animals. If they're living up in that, they're just plowing a trail through that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They're not hopping or post holing, stotting or something like that. So it was just an observation driving through Yellowstone Park in an area that there is recent history of experiences, encounters, whatever. Again, anecdotal. What it was, I didn't get out and look for specifically. Is it a 5 to 18-inch track in the snow?
Right.
It's just like, it was probably sub-zero. And
you're like, I'll stay in the car.
Yeah, exactly. And I've kicked myself in the butt ever since. And I should have got out, at least stick my nose in one of those, see what the bottom looks like. I just did.
Right. Hey, you never know, right?
And that's it. And that's a lot of people probably the same thing. You see some of these videos online, and why they stop filming? Why did they chase it or pursue it? Or they didn't go look at tracks. Well, I didn't see a creature. I don't know what made those. It was impressions of snow and an animal made of some sort. So that being said, those are more my miscellaneous, but I'll start focusing a little more on some of the more regional and closer to my part of the world, Western Oregon, Western Washington. One of those, Mount St. Helens. Matt Adams, Roger Patterson lived in Yakima, which is right in that same region, and doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. I guess he did a lot of research up there. But so along the Columbia River, and I don't know how many listeners you have here and how many will see this later. I don't know how many live in the Pacific Northwest, how many are familiar with what all goes on out here. Some will probably know more than others, and I don't know it all by any means. But along the Columbia River, there was a local little newspaper. This probably would have been the late 60s. And my grandparents lived up there in a little town, or out in the country outside of the little community of Washougal, Washington. And my dad had gone to high school up there and all that. And I remember the little local paper one day had a sketch drawing of one of the local guys who, coincidentally, my dad had gone to school with. Said he's always kind of a kooky dude, but of He's driving up the highway on the Washington side of the Columbia River, which is the Columbia River Gorge. It's a big, beautiful natural feature. And in the fog in front of him, he sees something leaning across the road, thought it was a tree, and as he approaches it, so this is the Skamania County, which Skamania County has a law that it's illegal to kill a Sasquatch. And this is something I kept from around the 60s or early 70s. As a county ordinance or whatever, it's illegal to kill a Sasquatch in Skamania County, Washington. So along the highway, along the Columbia River, the guy my dad had gone to school with and wrote it up in the paper. He's driving along, he sees something, looks like a tree leaning across the 2-lane remote little highway in the dark. And as he in the fog, and as he approaches, the thing continues to walk across the road. So the paper comes out. They have a little sketch. My dad goes, "I know that guy. He's kind of a goofy dude in high school." But as a result of that, and there's been a number of sightings along that section of the, I remember the Highway 16 or something. I can't remember the highway number on that side of the Columbia. There's been a number of sightings in the Columbia River Gorge on that highway as well as across the Columbia River, which is a very large river. On the Oregon side, it's a major interstate freeway, I-84. And there's been sightings on both sides of the Columbia River on these highways and freeways over decades. So, but at that location, near that location where my dad's old high school buddy had seen this creature, someone made a big plywood cutout. And so again, we're talking, this is probably right around late 60s, 1970-ish. And I've looked before. My dad took a photo of it. Yeah, I think he used to make slides out of these. I looked several years ago. But they made this big old cutout right at that crossing. So on that highway on the Washington side, there's this 8-foot plywood cutout of a Bigfoot. And it was there for several years. It was really cool. I wish I could find the picture because Dad wanted to take a picture of me one day next to it. I was scared to death to go up next to that thing and get my picture taken next to this Bigfoot cutout. But I just remember it's just this big kind of rudimentary, kind of painted up plywood cutout silhouette where Bigfoot was sighted and crossed the highway on Highway 16, Highway 18 on the Washington side. So that's going back to, just a little bit of that history. Again, it was just kind of a neat little thing. So, but right around that time, my father and I went up to Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. And it's also, there's a wilderness area called the Indian Heaven Wilderness, big time huckleberry picking. And again, a ton of Bigfoot history from over the years. And over the years, I'm talking over a couple of generations. So, right around, as I'm looking at my dates, right around June of 1971, my dad and I, we were driving around. He had an old a Ford Bronco. We just take it out in the mountains all the time. And he used to run around that country quite a bit. And, he grew up there hunting and fishing and just chasing around, just, getting in trouble. And this one's one of the more significant in my early stages of the interest in Bigfoot. Remember, we went up on an old logging road on a north slope, and we came up to the kind of the top of the clear cut. It was all north slope, and there's snow on the grounds, and that's why it was early enough in the year that we could access all the roads to get up there. But it was also, it was late enough in the year we could do that because the roads were melted out. But it was early enough in the year there's still a big snowbank on that north slope with this ridge or mountain we were on. And we parked the Jeep or the Bronco, and as we get out, and I'm young, I'm 7-ish years old or something like that, 6, 7, 8. And we get out, and there are these impressions all up and down this slope. And I guess going from recollection, it's 200 yards long, maybe 300. Just open slope had been logged, and the snow was probably anywhere from inches deep to maybe a foot or two. Where there's these huge impressions that went down and up like 3 or 4 times up and down this slope. It wasn't people; they were melted out. And my dad's reminding this me as well, but it was just the location, the size of these melted out impressions in the snow. They were very consistent. I don't remember the stride length or whatever. And again, you talking about deer earlier and their post hulling and jumping. A deer didn't jump all the way down the hill and jump back up and jump back down that hill 3 or 4 or 5 times. And these impressions or tracks, which again doesn't make any sense to this day on what made them and why, but they just went up and down this big north slope snowbank 3 or 4 or 5 times, like what do you call it? It was weird. It was just, they were big melted out impressions in the snow. Someone didn't walk up and down that thing. And if it was a Bigfoot, why he walked up and down that thing, who knows? But it's just something that's always really stuck in my mind.
What did that do to your thinking in that moment when you like? Were you freaked out, or were you like, I have no idea what's going on?
Great question. So when I was younger, in that age, at 6, 7, 8, and again, Roger Patterson and Gimlin, that film coming out in 67, 68, whatever it was, because they filmed and ran it all over the place. I was terrified of the woods, and I loved going in the outdoors and camping with my dad. So it didn't help. I had a tough time whenever we went out. We had a little tent trailer, occasionally we'd tent camp, whatever. I had a tough time camping in the woods. The daylight, I was fine. Whenever it started getting dark, I just had a tough time sleeping. So that experience there again, that's the only thing I could think of as Bigfoot. So my dad's one of those naysayers, and to this day, he's and I'll get into some stories here a little bit later. Some of the areas that are like the Freeman location, and all that. We spent a lot of time in that country for decades as well. My dad has never seen or experienced anything to even give him an inkling of belief. So even those tracks, we've talked about those in the past, he doesn't know what the heck they were. And obviously at that point he was in his mid 30s, whatever. But no, I can't say I got any more scared, but I just kind of confirmed a little more that I can't sleep at night when I'm camping in the woods. That's kind of what that came to.
Right. Yeah.
It took a long time to get over that too.
Oh, I bet, man. That's funny.
Yeah. So it's a definitive no by any means. But anyway, it's another one of those little memories of personal experience. It's just random, and to this day I really can't explain now how big the snowfield was. I know it would have been right around June of that year of again around 71. So just because of the snow conditions and all that, but it makes no sense to me what made tracks up and down that hill 3 or 4 times. And at this point we'll never know, but some things make more sense than others. So up in that same country, so my stepbrother, Brian, my parents divorced when I was 3, dad got remarried a couple years later. And so my stepbrother, Brian, they had I can't remember why, but they had some family, I think, or relations up in the Yakima area, which that Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and Yakima is where Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin both lived. Bob still does. So somewhere right around the early 70s, there's a pass when you're coming from Oregon and having to go cross country. You go through a big Indian reservation. You go over this, it's called Sadis Pass, and it's not real high. It's 3,500 feet, whatever. And drop down the backside to the reservation. You hit a couple of communities to get to Yakima. So, and again, this is just from him. They're driving back in the dark. He's with his father. So this is after mom and his mother and his father had separated and divorced. I think his mom and my dad might have been remarried by then. But they're coming back through that area at night. And I'm just looking at my notes, kind of refresh my memory on it. Late at night, driving back from Yakima to Portland in that Sadis Pass area, and something large crossed the road in front of them, 2 lakes. Wow. And once again, these are areas that aren't random. These are all areas that have a history. And that's all it was. In the dark, young kids with their father, and something on 2 lakes cross the road in the dark in front of them. And that's about all I got on that one.
The best thing about these stories like this is that the people in these stories have nothing to gain by sharing these stories. Like, they're not going to become famous or get tons of money. Like, they're just sharing, hey, this happened to me. And like, there's thousands of these.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And I'll even get a couple of those here. I've got twin brothers that are really good friends, but one can't tell the story to the other because the other one laugh at him. But we'll get to that in a bit. So, these are my best friends. So, but yeah, and that's it. These stories have been shared with me just over the course of time, and most of them have never been shared beyond me. And so it's just because they're experiences that most of them really they've spent no more time even thinking about them. So just kind of randomly. Moving forward, up in that same Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams country. So another one. Now, again, I keep mentioning Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. That's kind of the region I'm working on here. But my grandpa grew up and worked in the coal mines in Pennsylvania back when he was younger. moved out here, got married to my grandma, started their family, my dad, and then his sister, my aunt. But my grandpa he loved hunting and fishing. And you're talking now probably the 40s, 50s, 60s. And it was a whole different world out here back then as it was, entire country and the entire world. So, Grandpa Pete loved to get out in the outdoors. And I remember him telling me a story once. And he and I never talked Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever. But he just told me a story that's a little interesting. And he's hunting from that same country. This was back in the early days, just like Bluff Creek in California, when that road was finally being encroached on, taking the bulldozers in, building roads, logging, whatever. And I've heard things about like the different Pigeon National Forest up around Mount St. Helens, that there was a pamphlet put out, and this kind of relates, but pamphlet put out to employees back in the 50s, 60s. If you ever encounter anything you can't explain, do not share it with anyone. Something along those lines. Because these were forests and mountains that were just starting to be, again, encroached on. So not a lot of people, not a lot of roads, not a lot of access, and logging was just starting to happen. So, and there've been fur trappers and miners out here for 100 years prior too. But so my grandpa's out hunting somewhere up in that country, whether it's deer or elk, I don't know, most likely elk. And he the story he told, and he told me this story 30, 40 years ago, but he's hunting and it's heavy timber, very heavily thick forested out here in this part of the West. And he sees a bear. And we have a bunch of bears out here, a ton of black bears, hundreds, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. He sees a black bear. There's a little stream crossing with a log on it. So he's watching this bear and he's going to shoot it. And I'm kind of surprised because back in that day, they shot almost anything they could. And as the bears, and I don't know what the distance was, if it was 50 yards, if it was 200 yards, it's heavy enough timber in that country. It wasn't half a mile out. It was reasonably somewhat within range and close. So as he's watching this bear, and if I recall correctly, my grandpa had an old 30-30 that did not have a scope on it, magnification. He's just shooting iron sights, so he's just looking at it eye to eye. So this bear approaches this log, stands up on its hind legs, and walks across the log to go across the creek. And then after that, I had whatever, dropped to all fours, whatever. But that's been thrown out there for years. Oh, you saw a bear or whatever walking on its hind legs. Well, the bears don't tend to walk on hind legs. And if the bear's approaching the log, he's on his all fours walking across. But that's just one story that always stuck with me that Grandpa Pete told me years ago. And again, he wasn't thrown out there, I think, at a Bigfoot sighting. He's just saying it was kind of a weird thing he saw. The bear's walking through the woods. He's looking at it, thinking of shooting it up. Thing stands up on its hind legs. And you hear stories of a Bigfoot on all fours, typically more in a scurrying type of a manner or whatever. It was just another story. One of all these stories I've got. It's just some for the notes and for the record, but it doesn't make any sense. And again, he made no reference. He's that old school and worked in the woods a lot growing up. I worked in the mines back in the coal mines and all that. Comes out here and worked for the county parks and spent a lot of time in the woods. He didn't say anything. It might have been a Bigfoot. He just told me a story about bear that stood on his hind legs, walked across the log and across the creek.
It's really weird.
Yeah. And so that's why I threw it out there. It makes no sense to me either, but what in the world? And he didn't make it up.
Yeah, why? I mean, there's no reason he would make that up.
Right. Exactly. So it was just a random story he told, and what even got him onto that topic. And again, this is going back, he's passed away a number of years ago now. So whatever he brought that subject up, I don't even recall, but that was what he had for me. So, and again, up in that same area, this is going back, 45-ish years ago now. And this could have been a bear or whatever, but there's a group of lakes up there, Forlorn. There's actually a bunch of lakes, real popular camping and fishing. Again, this Indian Heaven country, which is between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams. Neat, beautiful country. A lot of volcanic history and all that. We were up there one evening, my dad, my stepmother, my stepbrother and sister. And we get up kind of on a log landing, another kind of an older clear cut. And I heard a moan in the distance. And now I've heard a lot of bears moan. And they're pretty vocal sometimes as well. And this could have very well been a black bear. But we're up in some of the more active, I guess, or historically active Bigfoot areas. And I went running back to my dad because I kind of walked away from where we parked at the end of this trail, or at the end of this road, and kind of got out of the edge of this log landing. It was late in the evening. It was probably the last half hour of daylight. And again, this is an experience of mine, very anecdotal. I have no idea what it was. It wasn't there was no moose, it wasn't an elk or nothing. It's just a moan. And I was a young kid back then. Again, very scared of Bigfoot, very into Bigfoot. We heard this moan off in the distance, just kind of a bellowing, echoing moan. And go running back to my dad about 50 yards away. And did you hear that? Then we heard it once again. So again, as I put together my notes, so to speak, of stories and experiences and whatever, this one I just added to. It's just, again, that was a long time ago. I wasn't so wilderness and outdoor savvy back then, but it was just a moan to this day, and knowing what a bear sounds like when they make some of their mating moans, and so bears make a lot of calls. So the only thing I could think of was outside of anything else, could have been a bear moaning in the evening. It's just communication, whatever. But the sound I remember hearing, it wasn't loud. It echoed enough because it was a distance away. It wasn't a scream by any means, just a moan. It heard it twice, and over the hill, and what it was. Again, it could have very easily been a bear, but again, my recollection, I don't remember it sounding like what I typically have heard from bears in the forest in the north that made over the years. But again, that's all I've got on that. I can't tell you one way or the other what I actually heard. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an elk or a deer or anything else, but can't. So I'm not going to guarantee darn thing. So that being said, a little north of that, the Cascade Mountain Range, which runs from British Columbia, Canada, down and through Oregon, then it does kind of become the Sierra Nevadas as you get into California. The Cascades have a lot of history up and down them, and they're a rugged mountain range for the most part. A lot of volcanoes are on the edge of a tectonic plate. Some friends of ours, Will and Julie, I'll call them, which that is their name. But
yeah.
So okay. And that's as far as we go there, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
And this is just a random thing too. Someone asked, going back just a couple years ago, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, someone says, you need to talk to Will about their experience. And it's not like I go out there trolling for information from friends and acquaintances, or wife and I and a lot of friends and family are social, get out about it, but you got to talk to Will. So next time we saw Will, in his and Julie's early days, and I don't have a specific time. I would say this is probably in the 90s, roughly. They were up in the, I can't remember exactly what pass. You have a couple major passes in Washington, go from the Seattle-Tacoma area over to Yakima, heading to Spokane and all that. I think it's Snoqualmie Pass, but I can't be 100% sure. But they had a truck and a camper and pulled over at this pass one night. And again, up in this country, even recently, there's a lot of activity. So they're in the camper, and there's a little gap between the truck and the camper. And again, how much? It could have been a couple inches, whatever. In the middle of the night, there's something reaching between their camper and the cab of the truck pickup. It's rummaging around in there, and they could tell by how far it's reaching in. It was reaching in a long ways between the cab of the pickup and the camper, and woke them both up. And I wondered what the heck, who's screwing around with this, but it was just kind of ominous and eerie enough for them that they just kind of held tight. And again, I'm kind of filling in the blanks here. I can't recall all the exact details. So in the morning, Will goes out there and he finds long red hairs, and he said they're long and they stunk. Really? And he's told me, he says, I've got them in an envelope somewhere. I don't remember where they're at, and I want to go find. I got to go dig them out sometime. But just long red hairs, something digging in there between the camper and the cab of the truck, and long hair, stinky red hairs as a result of it. So, but that being said, just that story alone made him a believer. And I didn't talk with his wife Julie at the time. They're no longer together. Not that matters. But anyway, just another one of those little story things that just kind of randomly, hey, you got to talk to Will about his story, and that's his story. And all of a sudden, he's a believer in Bigfoot. So
that one is really interesting.
Yeah.
Man, you said he held on to him, or
yeah, he's got hairs
in an
envelope somewhere. I had this conversation with him. It was a couple years ago now. I meant 4, 5, 6 years ago. I can't recall. And we're friends or acquaintances. It's not like we hang out buddy. I haven't seen or talked to him in probably a year or two. But I had told him, I said, go find that dang envelope. But And he's, he's got his trials and tribulations of life, just like all of us, I guess. So it's again, one of those people that probably had just that one particular experience and encounter, and we'll never forget it. But move on with life as well.
But if Will does happen to find the envelope with the hair, there is a rock and Bigfoot DNA study that's happening down in North Carolina State.
Really?
I believe it's North Carolina State.
Yeah.
And they are taking all sorts of evidence. It was announced today at a Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference.
Well, I'll message you. Yeah. That's interesting. That's hey, Will, if ever come across that envelope. But yeah, I'm kind of curious as well. It's yeah. So anyway, like I said, that's the extent of that story, but still, it's intriguing. Again, moving on. So I mentioned earlier my stepbrother Brian, who had him and his dad, and I think and sister were with something across the road between Yakima and Portland years ago, whatever. But his older son, and I forgot about this one, and he just threw this at me randomly several years ago as well. But his friends' parents think they hit one with their car. And I don't exactly what or where or whatever, I don't know. And again, it's just a random conversation that my nephew and I had several years ago, they live up in they're all up in this kind of the Seattle metropolitan area for the most part. But my friends' parents think they hit one with a car once.
That's that's like a huge statement to throw out. Like, I mean, I would love to try to talk to him. Like, that's wild.
And who his friend, how much I question him on it. It's not like I'm trying to get all the details and I got to go there tomorrow and review the location, even if it was 25 years old or whatever. I can't remember. I don't even remember that conversation outside of, I've just kept these notes over the years, and all of a sudden that came up. So that topic. So, who the friend was, where it happened, how long ago it happened, I don't know. I mean, after we have this, follow up with any details you want me to try and gather and glean for you, I'll do what I can. Can't guarantee a darn thing, but who knows? Maybe I can get all the Creighton's buddies, friends, or parents, and you can talk with them.
I feel like if you're gonna say, yeah, we're pretty sure we hit a Bigfoot with our car, you probably have more details. Like, that's not just a short sentence that you'd throw out without having more stuff to back.
Right,
and that's interesting.
Yeah. But. So whether the Creighton's friend was with the parents and he was there when it happened, and then the friend said, "Hey, Creighton, I think we hit a Bigfoot last night," and then Creighton years later tells me, Uncle Rick, that my friend's parents think they hit a Bigfoot. So I don't know how deathless. They didn't make it up. The Creighton's friend didn't make that up to him, but again, that's all I've got for you at the moment.
Wild.
Then finally, as far as the Mount St. Helens country goes, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, there's another gentleman that's prominent, but it really stays below the radar here. A gentleman by the name of Joe Beelart.
I was like, he's going to say Beelart. He totally is, because Oregon Bigfoot Highway is such a good book.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen it yet. I want to get it, and Cliff, I know a couple places can get it, but I want Joe to sign it for me.
Yeah, you got
personally, as opposed, because I think Cliff has them signed by Joe, but I don't want to get one signed anonymously. I want to hold Joe's hand when he signs the dang thing for me. So anyway, that being said, I haven't seen it, but so years ago, and heck, I'm looking now. Heck, this is back in 2006, I guess. So 17 years ago. Doesn't seem that long. But I've been in communication with Joe and Cliff back then, and I'm not buddy with these guys, just random emails back in the days. I've met them both on a couple different occasions over the years. But yeah, back in 2006, and it's probably the winter of 2005, early 2006, I was emailing with Joe. Might have been before even Facebook, because we're friends on Facebook too. But Joe goes, "Hey," says, "how'd you like to be involved in a camp out?" And this is a Skookum Cast. You're familiar with Skookum Cast? And yeah. So, and how many listeners are right now? I don't know, but hopefully
tons.
Yeah,
tons.
So, and this is right after. So Skookum Cast must have been 2004, 2005, maybe. I don't remember the exact year, but it was prior to this. So, because I've dated here of June of 2006, but because that's when I was up there, or we were up there. So the previous winter, Joe's, "Hey, how'd you like to be part of a Bigfoot camp?" And I said, "Oh, cool. Well, give me your address." So a couple days later, I get this mailing. It is a pamphlet. It's an envelope about an inch thick. I go, "What the heck did Joe Beelart send us?" And this was like a disclaimer. It was on and on and on. And what they're trying to do is kind of create some kind of a habituation up near Skookum Meadows for the summer. And they wanted people to occupy the specific camp spot throughout all summer long. And in different groups, if you can commit 2 days, 3 days, a whole week, a whole month, whatever, but they just wanted to have a continual occupation of this campsite. So so once I started reading this documentation, we had 2 young boys then and a young chocolate lab. And I was reading, I said, oh crap, they want us to go up there. They want us to go up there alone. That would be a big shindig of 5, 10, 15, 20 Bigfoot enthusiasts. Oh no, we got to go up to Skookum Meadows and camp out by ourselves. Oh crap, honey. So we ended up doing it. And had a great time. And actually, I mentioned I've got some photos, some things there. But there's another gentleman. Do you know Rick Noll? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, dude. Well, I don't. I've never met Rick Noll, but I know how he's involved with things. Right. Yeah, totally.
So we go up to Skookum Meadows, like I said, and this would have been in the winter that we were making these arrangements to participate. So we picked like a 4 or 5 day window. I can't remember how long we were up there. Took our trailer up and had the specific spot to go camp and all that. Gated road behind, had my mountain bike, had the young lab, chocolate lab, had my boys who were 17 years ago, so like 7 and 5, I guess. And we fiddle-farted around for a couple days. Went out, did some wood knocking and all that. And but right up behind our camp, up a logging road, because there's a lot of old logging history up there. And right up behind camp, you go 100, 200 yards up, it's gated, and probably 100 yards from camp on the road, off the main forest road that we camped. There's this very rough copy of a sign there with a rough sketching of a Bigfoot, I guess you want to call it. And I can't share with you now, but it's something that I've got it right here. Historical Bigfoot activity zone, and underlined in bold letters, be aware. So awesome. I go riding up behind camp, and all of a sudden there's a sign there. I decided to go get my wife and get the kids come up, and I took a picture and all. This is really pretty cool. So I knew we were camping in the right spot anyway. So I think our last morning, there was a road that kind of continued to the east from where we camped, and took the young lab out. Had to go. We went out early in the morning. Everyone's still crashed out, and we probably went about 2 miles up this. It's a good gravel road. It goes right up along Skookum Meadows. I go 1.5 miles, 2 miles. It's gated, and it's a seasonal gate. It can open and close. So Dog and I go up there. Then we got up to a side road, and I love exploring. Again, there's a lot of elk sign up in there. I just, always thinking of hunting. I don't love to kill, but I love to hunt and pursue and be out there. So we took this little side gravel road and went up there a little ways. Half mile or so, and it's getting to the point where we're about ready to turn around. The pup, she's I don't know, she's 5, 6, 7 months old, just full of pea and vinegar and energetic and bouncing all over. And so we've been gone an hour or so, hour and a half, and go up this side gravel road. It's all flat. It's just kind of a high valley, Skookum Meadows there, and meadows and swampy stuff all around. And we go up the side road, and there's a little cut bank on the right-hand side of the road. As we're wandering through there, I look up on it and I go, "You've got to be crapping." I didn't say crapping, but you got to be crapping. And up on the side hill, this cut bank, maybe 5 or 6 feet tall. There was this impression. You couldn't see the heel side of it so much, but the upper front part, there's an impression 7, 8 inches wide with toe indentations on it. One flat impression walking this cut bank going up. And I go, "You got it." So had my phone with me. I think it was a phone, might have been who knows, it could have been a digital camera, probably was a digital camera. Put my foot next to it, took a couple pictures and all. And my young lab, she's bouncing all over the place. I'm getting a little ticked. I didn't bring a leash for her because we're out nowhere, didn't need a leash. She didn't get more than 10, 20 feet from me, but she's just jumping all over, up and down my legs. And I'm scared to death she's going to jump on this. And this impression was, it was like it was on a wet substrate, or wet kind of a hill, and it now is bone dry. It's probably in late June, and it was not a fresh impression. It had been there for a while, but it was soft enough that this impression had been made there with that looked like, you can count 5 toes on it. You can just see the forefront of it again. That just kind of the way the impression was. The backside didn't leave a whole lot, and I said, "You got to be kidding me." this it's like a dang Bigfoot track walking up this embankment, one step, and then up on top of the cut bank. And dog's bouncing all over. I'm trying to take a picture, and she's jumping around because all she wants to do is love and play and jump on you. So I took a few pictures with my foot next to it. Then we bailed out of there and made our 2.5 mile track back to camp. Told my wife about it, and I had some casting material, but it was just far enough away. And I questioned it. There were some things about the track I wondered about, and I just went on. So got back home that night. The following day, emailed Joe Bielart, sent him a picture. He goes, "Holy crap!" Says, and I had heard of Rick Noll's name. I'd never met him before and hadn't heard a whole lot. He's one of those guys, again, kind of under the radar. So we made arrangements 2 weeks later to meet Rick Noll up there. And this in the middle of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. It's actually, I mean, of all the time we'd spent up there, we'd seen like 2 vehicles in 4 or 5 days of camping up there. It doesn't get a whole lot of traffic. So wife and I went up there like on a Thursday or Friday and met Rick up there and walked in there. Well, there'd been some thunderstorms. So it's not summer thunderstorms up there. And I told him I was a little concerned. Now he's come from the Seattle area and he didn't seem to be as concerned. I said, man, I know we get some pretty good thunderstorms and some pretty good showers out of them. He didn't think it'd be an issue. Well, we make the stroll back up in that area. And again, it's roughly an hour walk. It's all, like I said, it's all good gravel forest road. It's just gated. And as we got back up in there, in addition to that, there's a lot of growth there. Some of the mountain lupin, which is cool flowering plant, some other stuff. Mm-hmm. So as we got to that cut bank, I can swear this where it was. And you can maybe see a little impression, a little definition where I thought this might have been it. And Rick was up there. He's walking around. He walked up on the cut bank and looked back in there and all that. And he is telling us all his stuff and telling us about some of the different tracking methods that are kind of cutting edge back then. Some different things they're playing with, whatever. And but again, it's just that what I saw the 2 weeks previous when I was there, we just could not find it. Well, I took pictures of what I thought was it, and as I came back home, compared the pictures, yeah, we were at the exact same location where that impression was, just the rain from 2 weeks earlier. And again, one of the little plants there, a little lupin, it went from this to like about 5 or 6 inches. So it was the same exact plant they'd grown. It was the same thing. It's just the thunderstorms, the summer thunderstorms, had just come at, who knows, you can get a half inch or two of rain in a short period of time when that happens. So we were right there. Just there was nothing for him to really see outside of the photos I'd taken a few weeks ago. But I said Joe Bielart wasn't excited enough to send Rick Noll up there to meet with it. But just summer thunderstorms kind of ruined it. And exactly what it was, I don't know. I'll send you the pictures sometime. But it's
that would be awesome. And you have pictures of the sign too.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be so cool. So was this after? So this would have been after. Okay, the Skookum Cast was cast in September of 2000. Okay, so this is like a few years after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew it was after. I just a couple, but 6 years isn't that far. But
yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah. That's such an interesting story, Rick. Like, way to.
So anyway, so I had to jump the Joe Bielart name.
That's awesome, dude. That's an amazing talk about being involved with Rick Noll, and that's for Bigfoot history. That's really cool.
Yeah, he didn't seem to be too terribly impressed with it all. But the fact that he just kind of missed the boat by 2 weeks, and again, I don't know what I found there, but yeah, when you see the pictures, you might.
How close to were you aware of where the site of the actual Skookum Cast was?
Sure, I think we were in less than a mile. I think it was the road slightly to the south of where we were camped that we would have driven by. We were real close. I mean, we were camped right next to Skookum Meadows. So where that cast was made was not in Skookum Meadows. It's on off the side of the road nearby. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking where we were camped, it was all triangulation wise, all real close.
That's amazing. That's such a cool story.
Yeah, it was just kind of like I said. It's Joe Bielart connects, and all said, okay, that's cool. We're in with Joe Bielart. Then he sends us this thing, and we got to camp by ourselves. We're not part of a big camping crew. But anyway, okay, great, whatever. But we survived.
There you go.
And I may have found a trap. So I've got plenty more. Are you still with me?
I'm still with you, dude. I mean, dude, I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm still with you.
So I'm going to switch regions now.
All right.
This goes to the Northeast Oregon, Southwest or Southeast Washington, the Weena Toucan Wilderness area. This is Paul Freeman country.
Yeah, dude.
And the Mill Creek watershed. And again, I'll go as chronologically as I can with this. Most of it is pretty much. So first of all, the Mill Creek watershed is the watershed for the city of Walla Walla. And Paul Freeman, they've patrolled it for decades to keep people out of the Mill Creek watershed. And to water purity and whatever. And Walla Walla is not a huge town by any means. It's grown tremendously in the last generation or so. But they just protected it like crazy. Yeah. And Paul Freeman was they have watershed patrollers. So it's closed to public entry. The watershed is, and it's a hole. They give out elk tags in the straddles the Oregon-Washington border. They give it elk tags, which are very highly coveted elk tags because they just give out a few. So the elk the bulls in there grow big, mature because they're lightly hunted. No one's in there bugging them all year. You have like 5 or 7 days out of the year that they have these hunts in there, and they're very difficult tags to get. They just allow a handful of hunters in there, so it's just a coveted tag. People sneak in to poach because these big mature bull elk hang out in there, and so they've got these patrol riders at spot and scopes. They ride horses through the watershed. They patrol the boundary. That's just big rugged country. You get along the upper perimeter of this, the canyon drops off like that. It's 60, 70. I've always joked you don't want to drop your bowling ball out here because you'll never get it back.
Right.
And these canyons drop 2,000 or 3,000 feet deep. It's just big, beautiful country. And obviously what an ideal area for anything to live and not be bothered. So Paul Freeman was a watershed patroller, a Forest Service employee, watershed patroller. And this is where he had the sighting while he was employed by the Forest Service. See, he may not have been on duty that day. I don't recall exactly, or the couple times he's had encounters or sightings, whatever. But I fortunately, I got to grow up. So where the watershed is on the across the road from there is this big wilderness area. It's one of the first wilderness areas in Oregon, the Wenaha-Tucannon Wilderness. Once again, no roads. It's open to public entry, but it's by trail only. You can't take bikes in there. You can't take a chainsaw. You can hike it or ride by bikes. And again, very rugged country, just beautiful, awesome country. And there's just a bunch of history up there, Bigfoot. So, and I was fortunate because that's where my dad was hunting back in the days. He had applied for that Mill Creek watershed tag, and about every 10, 12 years, you get the tag to hunt in the Mill Creek watershed. And my uncle had horses, and if they weren't hunting in this watershed, they were hunting over in the wilderness on horses. They'd pack in 8 or 10 miles in the middle of the wilderness. And said I was just fortunate being back in my early days of hunting. I got to go hunt in this very remote, pristine country in Northeast Oregon. So some friends of my grandparents, Gene and Zola Howard, and again, this is going back decades. The watershed rider back, and I'm looking, this must have been in the 70s, is a guy by the name of Red. And then this is kind of a secondhand story from this Gene and Zola that they told my dad when he was younger than my dad told me. But
sure.
Gene being the hunter, I think Zola hunted. But they knew Red, the watershed rider from Mill Creek Watershed. And this Red told, this is kind of verbatim, I guess, more or less. But this Red told Gene more or less, he goes, what is it? He says, he lives there. This is in the Mill Creek Watershed talking about Bigfoot. He lives there. We know each other. Says, I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. Wow. So that's coming from the 70s, Mill Creek Watershed. Now, that being said, sightings up there, Mill Creek Watershed, they can climb up out of the watershed and cross the road and be into these other wilderness areas, big remote canyons and whatever. And that's where there's been sightings back and forth over the years. Again, the watershed is not open to public entry. So unless you're a watershed patrol rider, you're accessing almost year round outside of the deep snow winter months. So anyway, yeah, that was what Red had to say.
What happened to Red to make him say that? Like that's
yeah.
Can you imagine? Like
and this Gene and Zola, and again, Gene and Zola were my grandparents' friends that lived up outside of Washougal, Washington.
Yeah.
And Gene, I think, was more the hunter. He hunted with my grandfather. So yeah, what caused or created that conversation back in the 70s between Gene and Red, the watershed rider? I have no idea. Because I'm going to throw a couple other stories at you of our encounters and experiences and talking and conversations with these most recent watershed patrollers.
Oh, okay.
Who will totally negate anything you have to say about it, but we'll get to those. So that's why it was a good thing we're kind of doing this region by region. So anyway, that was what Red had to say. We know each other. I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. Later on, in 1979, roughly, October 79, which would have made me 15. And so my uncle had horses. Him and my father were hunting partners, hunting buddies. So we'd drive into this remote little campground on the edge of the wilderness. Then we'd take horses in. Roughly it was 8 to 10 miles. High ridges. Again, just neat country. Very few people back there. You had a wilderness area. But I wouldn't say to yourself, because elk hunting was pretty popular back then. Anyone could get a tag, but still, it was just kind of a unique kind of experience. And here I am, a teenager, getting the opportunity to go back in there. So there's a canyon back in there, and I hesitate to name it, so I won't, because I have another story that kind of follow along. But as you get back in the wilderness, one of the canyons, we get back in there on this long ridge, and you had some canyons, and these canyons are holes. Again, you don't want to drop your bowling ball back there. But my father and I hunted down in the bottom of this one canyon one day. And as we were, and you don't go in the bottom of these canyons unless you really gotta. Because once you get in the bottom, you have to get your butt out back to camp.
Right.
It's not forgiving country. It's beautiful. And I was a young kid back then. I'd love to go out there these days, just to see it from my perspective and age now, because I haven't been in there in probably 30 plus years. But anyway, this particular canyon, we get in the bottom of it, and again, we're elk hunting. And as we're working up the bottom, there's game trails and stuff. And we're working up the bottom, and all of a sudden we get to an area, and it's getting to mid-afternoon, whatever. Weather's really nice this is late October too, when the elk seasons are. In the bottom, and all of a sudden we get to a spot where we're going to start climbing back out of the canyon. And I'm talking a good hour hike, and probably closer to 2, because it's just a nonstop grind climbing up out of there. And we get to a point at the bottom where all of a sudden all the game sign, elk sign in particular, but there's all kinds of other stuff in there too, but all of a sudden, it's just, the trails just kind of, even though there's trails in there, there's just like no sign, and it became just dead quiet. And I remember to this day, and my dad made the same comment back then. It was just an eerie, and again, you're in the bottom of a canyon where the walls on both sides are going up. We're at the bottom of this canyon, it just became just an eerie feel down there. And again, this will play into another story here in a bit. And Dad made it, no birds, it just no life. It was just kind of an eerie, dead, quiet, silent canyon bottom. And then we proceeded to climb out, and that was it. But I just remember that because it was just I've never been so tuned in to know, I think that something's watching me or whatever, and whether it's my wife or a Bigfoot or a cougar or whatever, I've never had those senses, I don't think. But we're in the bottom there, and it was just weird. It was just a weird, dead, calm, silent canyon bottom. So we climbed out of there, and that's really kind of the end of that. So a year later, we're back out in that same country, again, the end of October. This has been roughly, I think, 1980. And this canyon is probably 4, 5, 6 miles long, and it's just kind of from the headwaters where the drainage starts, it just kind of works its way down to the Winona River. But we were up at the upper end of the drainage on a pack trail. And we're hiking out one day, and we got to the head, and we had a breeze kind of coming up that drainage, and we had a section there where we had like an ungodly smell. And it was midday, the thermals and all that, the air is starting to get warming up and rising. But as it's working its way up that drainage, we're going through a little patch of timber, some open hillsides, and we got to a section there where it was just a deathly stinking stench. There's elk hunters in there. Someone could have killed an elk down in that little patch of timber below us, a couple 100 yards, and a couple days later, the guts and whatever might have been getting rotten, and it might have been just working its way up with that afternoon breeze or whatever. I don't know, but I've just always remembered that stench coming out of the same canyon that we had this little eerie experience down deeper the previous year. So what it was we smelled, I don't know. The thing is, as we walked, we went through about a 50-yard, maybe 100-yard section of this trail, and all of a sudden we're out of so we were within the cone of whatever was the cause of this odor. We just kind of went through the cone and walked through it within a minute or two, and then you're out of it. But it was just kind of stomach curdling, the smell. It very easily could have been an elk that someone had harvested down there and cleaned, and then we were just smelling what left, because body parts I don't think smell real good if they've been sitting out in the sun or aging for a couple of years, especially if they're outside of your body. So yeah, just the stench, the strong smell at the head of that canyon.
You just listened to part 1 of Rick Rasmor's Bigfoot Adventures in the Pacific Northwest. We'll be back in about a week with part 2. You won't want to miss it. It does get pretty wild. I mean, the stuff we've already heard. Rick Noll, Paul Freeman related. It does get crazier, though, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on part 2. The whole audio is live in the Patreon already, but we'll be back with part 2 in about a week. Thanks for listening. Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.